The city smells of incense and salt water. Constantinople. Stand here on the shore of the Bosphorus in the dying light of a May evening in 1453, and you can hear it. The low, guttural thunder of Ottoman cannon fire, each detonation sending tremors through foundations that were laid when Rome still ruled the known world. The walls before you are not merely walls. They are the accumulated defiance of 11 centuries, 1100 years of plague, siege, civil war, schism, and betrayal, and still they stand. But tonight, something is different. Tonight, the last Roman emperor, Constantine XI, a man descended in spiritual lineage from Augustus himself, is arming himself in a chamber where the gold mosaics still gleam as if the empire is not dying, as if the purple has not already begun to fade. His army numbers fewer than 10,000. Beyond the walls, Mehmed II commands 80,000 soldiers, and a weapons technology so advanced for its time that the very concept of a walled city is becoming obsolete. One man, one city, one empire, standing at the absolute edge of extinction. But here is the question that history rarely stops to ask. Was this the end of Rome? Or was Rome something so vast, so deeply embedded in the architecture of human civilization, that it never truly died at all? To answer that, we have to go back. Not to 1453, not even to the founding of Constantinople in 330 AD. We have to go back to the moment Rome split in two, and one half of it simply refused to stop. When historians speak of the fall of Rome, they almost always mean 476 AD, the year a Germanic chieftain named Odoacer deposed the last emperor in the West, a teenage figurehead so inconsequential history barely remembers his name. But in the East, no one fell, no one surrendered. The Eastern court in Constantinople looked westward at the smoldering ruins of a civilization and simply continued. They called themselves Romans. They spoke Greek. They prayed in a form of Christianity that was becoming increasingly distinct from what Rome practiced. A faith shaped by fierce theological battles that were, in truth, political battles wearing ecclesiastical robes. The early Byzantine emperors understood something that the West had forgotten, that empire is not an army, it is an idea, and ideas are sustained by law, by ritual, by the seamless performance of continuity. Justinian I, who ruled from 527 to 565, understood this with almost frightening clarity. He was not a man born to the purple. He was the nephew of a Balkan peasant who had clawed his way into the palace, and he carried within him the hunger of someone who had seen what powerlessness looks like up close. He launched a campaign to reconquer the lost western territories, and for a moment, a breathtaking, improbable moment, it almost worked. His general Belisarius, commanding armies absurdly small for the ambitions assigned to them, recaptured North Africa, Italy, and parts of Spain. But Justinian's more durable conquest was not territorial. It was legal. His Corpus Juris Civilis, the great codification of Roman law, became the skeleton upon which European legal systems would be built for the next 1,500 years. When a judge today in Paris or Madrid or Buenos Aires reasons about property rights or civic obligation, they are, in some ghostly and unacknowledged way, still living inside Justinian's empire. But empires do not fall from outside alone. They are always excavated from within first. For centuries, Byzantium was a pressure cooker of competing forces. Ambitious generals who commanded the loyalty of frontier armies, religious factions that could mobilize street violence over the precise theological nature of Christ's divinity, and an empress class of genuinely extraordinary women whose influence the official histories consistently tried to minimize. Theodora, Justinian's wife, was a former actress from the lowest rungs of Constantinople's social hierarchy, and she is one of the most consequential political figures of the medieval world. When the Nika Riots of 532 AD turned Constantinople into a burning battlefield and Justinian's advisors were urging him to flee by sea, it was Theodora who stood in the throne room and delivered what may be the most electrifying political speech of the 6th century. She told them she would not flee. She told them that the purple was a fine burial shroud. She told them that an emperor who ran was not an emperor at all. Justinian stayed. The riot was crushed. 30,000 people died in the Hippodrome in a single afternoon. And here is the uncomfortable arithmetic of power. That speech, that decision, that massacre, preserved an empire that would protect Greek philosophy, Roman law, and Orthodox theology for another 900 years. History does not offer clean moral ledgers. It offers only consequences, cascading outward like ripples from a stone dropped into dark water. By the 11th century, the empire was fracturing under a different kind of pressure. The Battle of Manzikert in 1071 broke Byzantine control of Anatolia, the agricultural heartland that fed the empire's armies, and set in motion a slow hemorrhage that no subsequent emperor could fully stop. The Crusades, launched in part because of Byzantine appeals for help against Seljuk, brought Latin armies through Constantinople, armies that looked at the city's legendary wealth with something closer to appetite than alliance. In 1204, the Fourth Crusade did not reach Jerusalem. It sacked Constantinople instead, stripping the great churches of their relics and treasures, installing a Latin emperor on a throne that had been Roman for 9 centuries. The Byzantines recovered the city 57 years later, but they never recovered what had been taken from them, and they both knew it and refused to say it aloud. Here is what the romantic narrative of Byzantium tends to leave out. The empire that preserved classical learning and built the Hagia Sophia also perfected an almost Baroque culture of political violence. Blinding, the deliberate destruction of a rival's eyes, Skia was so institutionalized as a method of political neutralization that it barely warranted comment in contemporary chronicles. It was considered merciful compared to execution. Emperors blinded brothers, sons, generals, and co-rulers with a bureaucratic regularity that suggests the practice was not passion but policy. The Sacred Palace complex was a labyrinth of intrigue in which alliances lasted seasons, and loyalty was always transactional. Of the 94 emperors who ruled Byzantium between 395 and 1453, fewer than half died of natural causes. The rest were assassinated, deposed, mutilated, or exiled. This is not incidental background noise. It is the central machinery of the state. Furthermore, the empire's relationship with the peoples on its frontiers was defined not by the elevated rhetoric of Roman civilization that its court historiographers produced, but by a pragmatic and sometimes brutal system of tribute, manipulation, and what we might today recognize as a kind of imperial soft power, cultivating dependent client states, engineering dynastic marriages, subsidizing barbarian leaders to fight other barbarian leaders, and, when that failed, building another wall. The Byzantines were also significant participants in the Mediterranean slave trade, and the human cost of their frontier wars fought in the Balkans, in Anatolia, in Syria, was borne overwhelmingly by populations whose names do not appear in the chronicles at all. Great civilizations do not become great by being gentle. They become great by being effective, and effectiveness across the full sweep of history has always required us to look at what we would prefer not to see. Constantinople fell on the 29th of May, 1453. Constantine XI died fighting, his body never definitively identified among the dead, which is perhaps the most Roman ending imaginable for the last Roman emperor, consumed by history without even the punctuation of a confirmed grave. Mehmed II, 21 years old, rode into the city and went first to the Hagia Sophia, where he ordered Islamic prayers to be said, a moment that was simultaneously a military and a theological declaration. He called himself Caesar Rum, Caesar of Rome. He was not mocking the tradition he had ended, he was, in his own conception, inheriting it. And this is where history becomes genuinely strange and genuinely instructive, because the fall of Constantinople did not erase what Byzantium had spent 1,000 years building. Greek scholars, fleeing westward for decades before the final siege, had been carrying manuscripts to Italy, Plato, Aristotle, Euclid, Ptolemy, texts that had been preserved in Byzantine libraries, while Western Europe navigated its own long centuries of institutional fragmentation. The Renaissance, that explosion of art and inquiry and recovered classical thought that we locate as the beginning of the modern Western world, was fueled in substantial part by this Byzantine migration of knowledge. The legal frameworks, the theological structures, the iconographic traditions, the very concept of the state as a professional, bureaucratic, law-bound institution rather than simply the expression of one warlord's personal power. These are Byzantine inheritances, worn so smoothly into the fabric of Western civilization that we have stopped noticing them the way we stopped noticing the walls of the room we inhabit. The Russian Orthodox Church declared Moscow the Third Rome. The Holy Roman Emperors in the West had long claimed Roman succession. Even the Ottoman sultans, as we have seen, reached for that title. Rome, it seems, was not a place or an army or even an emperor. It was a claim, a gravitational idea that every subsequent civilization felt compelled to either inherit or refute. So perhaps the real question, the one that should linger after the screen goes dark, is not whether Rome ever truly fell. Perhaps the question is whether we have ever truly left it, or whether we are still, in ways we are only beginning to understand, living inside its long, slow, magnificent, and deeply complicated shadow.